The dust storms of Hellgate 9 raged outside the reinforced transparent steel windows of Outpost Omega, a human settlement that was less a colony and more a desperate experiment in survival. Captain Michael Reynolds traced his fingers along the scared control panel, feeling the weight of isolation that had defined humanity's existence on the galactic stage for generations. Hellgate 9 was not a place for the weak. Temperatures fluctuated between scorching heat that could melt standard protective gear and freezing nights that could crystallize breath in seconds. The planet's atmosphere was a toxic cocktail of methane and sulfuric compounds, requiring constant maintenance of life support systems. Most would have called it uninhabitable. Humans called it home. The U.S. Defiance sat in its specially constructed hangar, a vessel that looked more like a scientific anomaly than a traditional warship. Its hull was a patchwork of experimental materials, quantum-responsive alloys that seemed to shimmer and change even when stationary. Unlike the sleek, uniform designs of other galactic species, the Defiance looked like something cobbled together from desperation and pure human audacity. Reynolds remembered the ship's conception. It had been born in the darkest days of human expansion, when Earth's governments realized they were nothing more than a footnote in the vast galactic records. The Concordance, that great alliance of advanced civilizations, had made it clear humanity was primitive, inconsequential, a species barely worth acknowledging. The communication console flickered to life, breaking through his memories. Most transmission channels were heavily monitored by the Galactic Concordance, making open communication a dangerous game. But this transmission was different. Its encryption was unlike anything Reynolds had seen before. A complex weave of quantum-entangled communication protocols that suggested it originated from somewhere far beyond standard communication networks. He activated the decryption sequence, his hands moving with practiced precision. The holographic display came to life, revealing a face that was both familiar and utterly alien. The being was clearly dying, its multiple respiratory systems failing, blue-green blood seeping from wounds that looked like they had been inflicted by weapons beyond human comprehension. "If you are receiving this," the alien spoke, its universal translator creating a voice that seemed to carry the weight of centuries, "then humanity's last hope remains." The alien's body was that of a species Reynolds had never encountered, six-limbed, with skin that seemed to change color and texture like a living camouflage. Cybernetic implants were visible beneath translucent skin, suggesting extensive modifications that spoke of a life spent in constant conflict. "The Vex Imperium is not what you believe," the alien continued, its multiple eyes, arranged in a complex pattern that suggested enhanced perception, seemed to look directly through the transmission. "What you see is a carefully constructed illusion, a facade of peace maintained through systematic elimination of any species that might challenge their supremacy." Classified data streams began to pour into the ship's computer systems. Star charts, communication logs, military movement records, a treasure trove of intelligence that would take weeks, if not months, to fully analyze. But even a cursory examination revealed a horrifying truth. The Vex Imperium had been systematically erasing entire species from existence, not through open warfare, but through calculated economic manipulation, engineered ecological disasters, and surgical political interventions. Hundreds of civilizations had simply vanished, their existence reduced to nothing more than historical footnotes. "They will come for you next," the alien gasped. Humanity represents something they cannot control, an unpredictability that terrifies them more than any military might. Reynolds felt a chill run down his spine. The transmission was more than just a warning. It was a call to action. The alien's final moments were captured in stark detail. Its body was failing, multiple organ systems shutting down. But its eyes, those incredible, multifaceted eyes, remained sharp, focused, determined. "The data packet contains everything," the alien whispered. "Use it. Survive. Prove that intelligence is more than technological advancement. Prove that spirit matters." Then, with a final breath that seemed to carry the hopes of countless extinct civilizations, the transmission ended. The ship's quantum adaptive computer began processing the incoming data. Terabytes of information sorted themselves, creating complex matrices of potential scenarios and strategic analysis. But Reynolds knew that no computer, no matter how advanced, could replace human intuition. He looked out at the raging dust storm of Hellgate 9. A smile began to form on his lips. The galaxy thought humanity was finished. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The hunt was about to begin. The quantum adaptive computer system hummed with an almost sentient intensity. Its processors were unlike anything developed by any known galactic species, a hybrid system that blended cutting-edge human computational theory with fragments of recovered alien technology. Most would have called it impossible. The research team that created it simply called it necessity. Dr. Elizabeth Reyes, the lead quantum systems engineer, had spent 15 years of her life creating this computational marvel. She stood beside Captain Reynolds, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that seemed to respond to her touch with an almost living intelligence. "The data transmission is unlike anything we've ever seen," she reported, her voice a mixture of scientific excitement and underlying tension. "It's not just encrypted. It's alive." Reynolds understood what she meant. The data packet they'd received wasn't a simple communication. It was a complex, self-evolving information ecosystem that seemed to adapt and change even as they attempted to analyze it. Each time their computer systems approached a breakthrough, the data would shift, creating new layers of complexity. The U.S. Defiance itself was a testament to human innovation born of desperation. Constructed in the secret shipyards beneath the Atacama Desert, it represented humanity's first true leap beyond conventional spacefaring technology. Its hull was composed of quantum-responsive metamaterials that could alter their molecular structure in milliseconds, providing unprecedented adaptive capabilities. Standard galactic scanning technologies would find the ship nearly impossible to detect. Its energy signature could be manipulated to mimic everything from a small cargo vessel to background radiation. But more importantly, the Defiance could learn and adapt faster than any known military vessel. "Probability calculations are complete," the ship's primary computational system reported. Its voice was deliberately modulated to sound neutral, almost human. "Mission success probability, 0.2%. Recommended action, immediate retreat and data preservation." Reynolds laughed, a sound that echoed with equal parts madness and determination. It was the laugh of someone who understood that probability meant nothing in the face of human willpower. Dr. Rice raised an eyebrow. "Those are not encouraging odds, Michael. Since when have humans ever cared about odds?" He responded, his fingers moving across the navigation console with a dancer's grace. Each movement was a complex series of quantum-encrypted commands that would have appeared as gibberish to any external observer. The ship's computational system continued its analysis. The data from the alien transmission was more than just intelligence. It was a complete strategic overview of the Vex Imperium's galactic control network. Star systems, communication relays, military deployments. Everything was laid out in intricate detail. But it was more than raw data. Hidden within the transmission were strategic insights that suggested something profound about the Vex method of control. They didn't just conquer through military might. They conquered through complex economic and social manipulation. "Look at this," Dr. Rice said, bringing up a holographic display that showed the economic interconnections between Vex-controlled systems. They don't just control territories. They control entire economic ecosystems. Entire species were kept in perpetual states of economic dependency. Those who showed any sign of technological advancement or potential resistance would find themselves suddenly cut off from critical resources. Trade routes would mysteriously become dangerous. Supply chains would collapse. It was genocide dressed in the language of galactic commerce. Reynolds studied the holographic display, his mind already working through potential counter-strategies. The Defiance was more than just a warship. It was a a declaration that humanity would not be another footnote in galactic history. "Plot an intercept course," he commanded. "We're going straight into the heart of Vex-controlled space." The ship's computational system began its calculations. Multiple potential routes were analyzed, each one considering hundreds of thousands of variables. Potential interdiction points, likelihood of detection, optimal approach vectors. Dr. Rice looked at Reynolds with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You do understand this is essentially a suicide mission." Reynolds' smile was sharp enough to cut quantum fields. "Humanity has survived by doing the impossible. This is just another Tuesday for us." The Defiance's engines began to pulse with an energy that seemed to bend the very fabric of space-time. Quantum capacitors charged. Adaptive shield systems initialized. A vessel that looked more like a scientific experiment than a warship prepared to challenge an entire galactic civilization. The hunt was about to begin. The first moments of encounter were always the most critical. Captain Michael Reynolds understood this better than most. As the Defiance glided through the darkness between star systems, the ship's quantum adaptive systems worked in perfect synchronization, creating a stealth field that defied conventional understanding of electromagnetic detection. 3 Vex battle cruisers hung in space like metallic leviathans. Each vessel was a marvel of technological engineering, sleek, symmetrical designs that represented centuries of advanced civilization. Their hull configurations suggested weapons systems that could obliterate entire planetary populations with a single volley. To any other species, these ships would represent certain destruction. To Reynolds, they represented an opportunity. Dr. Elizabeth Rice monitored the computational systems, her fingers moving with surgical precision across holographic interfaces. "Quantum signature masking is holding," she reported. "We're essentially invisible." The ship's primary computational system, a marvel of human engineering that blended quantum processing with adaptive learning algorithms, began its tactical analysis. Millions of potential scenarios were calculated and discarded in microseconds. Unlike traditional military AIs that followed rigid strategic protocols, this system was designed to think like a human. Unpredictable, creative, willing to take risks that defied conventional logic. "Approaching optimal engagement zone," the computational system reported. Its voice was carefully modulated, neither too human nor too mechanical. Reynolds watched the Vex battle group through the ship's primary viewer. Each vessel represented the pinnacle of alien technological achievement. Smooth, obsidian-like hulls that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Weapon systems that could track and destroy targets across multiple light years. But the Vex had one fundamental weakness they didn't understand. They had never encountered true human unpredictability. "Initiate quantum disruption sequence," Reynolds commanded. The attack, when it came, was nothing like standard galactic warfare protocols. Traditional space combat involved long-range missile exchanges, energy weapon bombardments, and carefully calculated approach vectors. The Defiance did something entirely different. It simply appeared. One moment, empty space. The next, the Defiance was directly between 2 of the massive Vex cruisers. Its quantum adaptive hull shifted through multiple electromagnetic spectrums, rendering traditional targeting systems completely useless. The first Vex cruiser's weapon systems tried to lock on. Impossible. The Defiance's hull was simultaneously absorbing, reflecting, and refracting energy signatures in patterns that defied physical laws. What should have been a clear targeting solution became a nightmare of computational confusion. Dr. Rice worked the computational interfaces with the intensity of a concert pianist. "Exploiting quantum communication network," she muttered. "Introducing recursive interference patterns." In practical terms, she was doing something unprecedented. She was hacking the Vex ship's communication network in real time, creating cascading interference that made their own systems turn against themselves. The second Vex cruiser attempted to maneuver. Impossibly, the Defiance was already there. Not through speed, but through a quantum manipulation of spatial positioning that suggested the ship could be in multiple locations simultaneously. Reynolds watched with a calm that would have seemed impossible to any traditional military commander. This wasn't just combat. This was a demonstration of human potential. Quantum entanglement targeting activated, the computational system reported. The third Vex cruiser never saw what hit it. Its primary communication arrays simply went dark. Then its weapon systems. Then its life support. Not through traditional electronic warfare, but through a complex quantum interference that essentially unraveled its technological infrastructure from the inside. 3 massive Vex battle cruisers, each capable of subjugating entire planetary systems, were disabled in less than 7 minutes. No weapons fired, no traditional combat maneuvers executed, just pure, unadulterated human innovation. Tactical assessment complete, the computational system reported. 0 damage to U.S. Defiance. Vex battle group, completely neutralized. Dr. Reyes looked at Reynolds, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I don't think they saw that coming. Reynolds' response was simple. They never do. The Vex communication networks erupted in confusion. Hundreds of communication channels suddenly filled with incomprehensible data streams. How could a single human vessel move with such precision? How could it penetrate defenses that had remained impenetrable for millennia? The answer was simple. Humans didn't play by the rules. They'd rewrote them. The hunt was truly beginning now. News traveled faster than light through the most intricate communication networks of the galaxy, but not through official channels. These messages moved through underground resistance networks. Encrypted whispers passed between species that had lived under the boot of the Vex Imperium for generations. The U.S. Defiance was no longer just a ship. It had become a legend. In the crowded marketplace of Nexus Prime, a trading hub that sat at the crossroads of 3 subjugated star systems, a group of resistance members gathered in the shadows. Krellax, a 6-limbed trader from the methane worlds of the Broken Arm Cluster, leaned close to a communication terminal. His translucent skin shifted colors, a biological response to extreme emotional states. It's true, Krellax whispered to his companions. A single human vessel disabled an entire Vex battle group without firing a single conventional weapon. Sitting beside him, Juran Tak, a silicon-based life form from the crystalline worlds of the Outer Rim, adjusted her communication implants. Her species had been on the verge of extinction multiple times, always crushed by the Vex Imperium's systematic oppression. Impossible, she responded. But her tone suggested something different. Hope. Encrypted transmissions began flooding through every available communication channel. Each message was a carefully constructed data package, bouncing through quantum-entangled communication relays that made traditional interception techniques obsolete. Captain Michael Reynolds watched the incoming transmissions with a mixture of fascination and strategic calculation. The ship's primary computational system analyzed each message, creating complex matrices of potential allies and strategic opportunities. Dr. Elizabeth Rice worked alongside him, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. We're receiving communication requests from at least 6 different resistance movements, she reported. Representatives from species we didn't even know existed are reaching out. Each transmission told a similar story. Species that had been considered minor, insignificant, or already extinct were sending coded messages of support. Star charts appeared. Military movement records. Economic dependency analyses. A treasure trove of intelligence that painted a horrifying picture of the Vex Imperium's method of control. It wasn't just military might that maintained the Vex's galactic dominance. It was a complex web of economic manipulation, carefully engineered social structures, and systematic elimination of any potential resistance. Look at this, Dr. Rice said, bringing up a holographic display that showed the economic interconnections between Vex-controlled systems. Entire civilizations were kept in perpetual states of economic dependency. Those who showed any sign of technological advancement or potential resistance would find themselves suddenly cut off from critical resources. Trade routes would mysteriously become dangerous. Supply chains would collapse. It was genocide dressed in the language of galactic commerce. One transmission stood out. It came from the crystalline networks of the Outer Rim, encrypted using a communication protocol that suggested extreme caution. The sender identified themselves as resistance leaders, Araktel of the Crystalline Confederacy. Their message was brief but profound. We have watched. We have waited. Humanity represents something the Vex cannot comprehend, an unpredictability that terrifies them more than any military might. Reynolds studied the transmission, his mind already working through potential strategies. The Defiance was more than just a warship now. It had become a symbol of resistance. More transmissions arrived. Each one added another piece to the complex puzzle of galactic resistance. Species that had been considered extinct were sending coded messages of support. Some offered intelligence. Others offered limited technological support. A transmission from the methane traders of the Broken Arm cluster caught Reynolds' attention. They proposed a meeting, a gathering of resistance leaders that would be impossible to track through traditional communication channels. "We're building something," Dr. Rice said, her voice carrying a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "A coalition that the Vex never saw coming." Reynolds smiled. The galaxy thought humanity was finished. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The computational system began processing the incoming data. Terabytes of information sorted themselves, creating complex matrices of potential scenarios and strategic analysis. But Reynolds knew that no computer, no matter how advanced, could replace human intuition. The resistance was awakening, and the Vex Imperium had no idea what was coming. The laboratory aboard the U.S. Defiance was not like any other research facility in known space. Its walls seemed to shimmer with potential, a testament to human innovation born of desperation and limitless creativity. Captain Michael Reynolds watched as Dr. Elizabeth Rice worked, her movements a complex dance of scientific precision and intuitive brilliance. "We're not just creating a weapon," she explained, holographic displays spinning around her like digital galaxies. "We're developing a quantum disruption algorithm that can fundamentally rewrite communication networks." The weapon, if it could even be called that, was a perfect synthesis of stolen alien technology, human computational theory, and pure unbridled imagination. Most species approached technological development linearly. Humans approached it like a puzzle with no predetermined solution. Dr. Marcus Chen, the team's quantum physics specialist, manipulated a holographic model that defied conventional understanding of information transfer. Lines of code twisted and transformed, creating patterns that seemed to breathe with their own intelligence. "Traditional electronic warfare is about destruction," Dr. Chen explained. "What we're creating is more like a linguistic virus that can reprogram entire communication ecosystems." The computational system began running simulations. Millions of potential scenarios were calculated and discarded in milliseconds. Unlike traditional military analysis programs, this system was designed to think like a human. Unpredictable, creative, willing to take risks that defied conventional logic. Reynolds understood the true power of what they were developing. The Vex Imperium controlled their vast galactic network through sophisticated communication protocols. These protocols were more than just technical specifications. They were the nervous system of an entire civilization. Their weapon would be a scalpel, not a hammer. Dr. Rice brought up a complex holographic representation of the Vex communication network. It looked like a living organism, interconnected nodes pulsing with streams of data that represented economic transactions, military movements, and social control mechanisms. "See these junction points," she said, pointing to critical intersections in the network. "These are more than just communication relays. They're the fundamental control mechanisms that maintain the Vex's galactic dominance." The quantum disruption algorithm they were developing wasn't designed to destroy. It was designed to subvert, to introduce complexity that would cause the entire system to collapse from within. Dr. Chen manipulated another holographic display. "We're essentially creating a language virus, something that can rewrite communication protocols at their most fundamental level." Reynolds watched the development with a calm that would have seemed impossible to traditional military commanders. This wasn't just weapon development. This was a form of linguistic warfare that no species had ever conceived. The resistance transmissions they had received provided crucial insights. Each message from the different species contained fragments of information about the Vex communication network, a crystalline trader's economic report, a methane-breathing species communication protocol analysis, pieces of a complex puzzle that only humans would think to combine. The key is adaptability, Dr. Rice explained. Traditional weapons are static. This is alive. It can learn, evolve. The computational system began running increasingly complex simulations. Each iteration became more sophisticated, more unpredictable. It was learning, adapting, becoming something more than a mere computational tool. Dr. Chen brought up a final simulation. The quantum disruption algorithm moved through the Vex communication network like a living thing. Not destroying, but transforming. Introducing complexity that would cause the entire system to question its own fundamental operating principles. "We're not just creating a weapon," Reynolds said, understanding the profound implications. "We're creating a revolution." The laboratory hummed with potential. Outside the ship's protective shields, the darkness of space stretched infinitely. But inside, something revolutionary was taking shape. A weapon that was more than a weapon. A tool of liberation disguised as a communication protocol. The computational system completed its final simulation. The results were unprecedented. Total network disruption was not just possible. It was inevitable. Dr. Rice looked at Reynolds, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I don't think the Vex will see this coming." Reynolds' response was simple. "They never do." The quantum weapon was ready. The hunt was about to enter its most critical phase. The heart of Vex-controlled space was not what most would imagine. It was not a single location, but a vast network of interconnected star systems that pulsed with a mechanical precision. Thousands of warships hung in strategic formation, each vessel a testament to generations of technological refinement. The U.S. Defiance approached like a phantom. Captain Michael Reynolds stood on the bridge, his posture relaxed, but his eyes razor-sharp. Dr. Elizabeth Rice worked beside him, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that seemed almost alive with potential. "Quantum signature masking at maximum efficiency," she reported. The ship's primary computational system had been preparing for this moment through millions of simulated scenarios. The Vex battle formation was a marvel of geometric precision. Massive dreadnoughts formed concentric circles, their weapon systems creating overlapping fields of destruction that could obliterate entire planetary systems. Each ship was connected through quantum communication networks that allowed instantaneous coordination. They never saw the Defiance coming. Dr. Marcus Chen's quantum disruption algorithm was more than a weapon. It was a living, evolving communication virus that would fundamentally rewrite the Vex's understanding of warfare. The first attack was psychological. Quantum communication channels began to fragment. Messages became garbled. Coordination patterns that had remained unchanged for centuries suddenly developed inexplicable complexity. It was like watching a perfectly synchronized dance suddenly fall into beautiful, terrifying chaos. "Introducing recursive interference patterns," Dr. Rice muttered, her voice a mixture of scientific excitement and strategic focus. The Vex fleet began to respond in ways that defied their own operational protocols. Ships that should have moved with perfect synchronization now showed signs of individual uncertainty. Communication pathways that had been rigidly controlled for generations began to develop unexpected variances. Reynolds understood what was happening. This wasn't just an attack. This was a fundamental challenge to the Vex's entire method of galactic control. The computational system began its tactical analysis. Unlike traditional military AIs, this system was designed to think like a human. Unpredictable, creative, willing to take risks that defied conventional logic. Primary communication networks destabilizing, the system reported. Its voice remained neutral, but there was an underlying current of something almost like excitement. Resistance leaders from multiple species watched through carefully encrypted channels. The methane traders of the Broken Arm cluster. the crystalline networks of the outer rim. Species that had been considered extinct were now witnessing something unprecedented. A single human vessel was dismantling the most sophisticated communication network in galactic history. Dr. Chen brought up a holographic representation of the quantum disruption algorithm's progression. It moved through the VEX communication network like a living organism, not destroying, but transforming, introducing complexity that would cause the entire system to question its own fundamental operating principles. The VEX fleet began to fragment. Ships that had moved with perfect coordination now showed signs of individual uncertainty. Communication pathways developed unexpected variances. It was like watching a perfectly synchronized machine suddenly develop individual consciousness. "They're losing cohesion," Dr. Rice said, her voice a mixture of scientific wonder and strategic satisfaction. Reynolds watched the holographic displays. Each moment revealed another layer of the VEX's vulnerability. Their strength had always been their ability to act as a single, unified entity. Now that very strength was becoming their greatest weakness. The quantum disruption algorithm was more than a weapon. It was a form of linguistic warfare that no species had ever conceived. Resistance transmissions began to flood in. The methane traders sent encoded messages of support. Crystalline communication networks shared tactical data. Species that had been considered extinct were now active participants in a revolution. Primary VEX communication networks at 62% destabilization, the computational system reported. Reynolds understood the profound implications. They were not just fighting a war. They were fundamentally challenging the entire method of galactic control that had existed for generations. Dr. Chen looked at the captain, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I don't think the VEX saw this coming." Reynolds' response was simple. "They never do." The great confrontation was entering its most critical phase, and humanity was about to show the galaxy exactly what it was capable of. The unraveling happened with a precision that defied traditional understanding of warfare. The VEX Imperium, a civilization that had dominated the galaxy for millennia, began to collapse from within, not through external force, but through the most insidious of weapons: complexity. Captain Michael Reynolds watched the holographic displays with a calm that bordered on meditation. The quantum disruption algorithm developed by Dr. Elizabeth Rice and Dr. Marcus Chen was doing more than just destroying communication networks. It was introducing a fundamental uncertainty that challenged the very core of the VEX's existential understanding. Across thousands of star systems, VEX control structures began to fragment. On the methane-rich worlds of the Broken Arm cluster, enslaved populations watched in disbelief as their oppressors suddenly lost cohesion. Communication networks that had maintained iron-fisted control for generations began to develop inexplicable variations. Orders became suggestions. Absolute control dissolved into confusion. Krellax, the six-limbed trader who had first spread news of the Defiance, watched from a hidden communication hub. His translucent skin shifted through a kaleidoscope of colors, a biological response to the unprecedented moment of liberation. "They're falling," he whispered to his fellow resistance members. "Humanity is making them fall." The computational system aboard the Defiance tracked the collapse with clinical precision. Each moment revealed another layer of the VEX Imperium's fundamental vulnerability. What had seemed like an impenetrable monolith was now revealing itself to be a complex system with critical weak points. Dr. Rice brought up a holographic model that showed the progressive destabilization. "It's not destruction," she explained to Reynolds. "It's deconstruction. We're introducing enough complexity to make their entire system unable to maintain its own structure." Resistance movements that had been crushed for generations suddenly found themselves with unprecedented opportunities. The crystalline networks of the outer rim began coordinating liberation efforts. Methane-breathing traders who had operated under constant threat now planned open rebellion. VEX central control networks at 89% destabilization, the ship's computational system reported. Reynolds understood the profound implications. This was more than a military victory. This was a fundamental challenge to the entire method of galactic control that had existed for generations. On 1,000 different worlds, enslaved populations began to realize something groundbreaking. The supposedly invincible Vex Imperium was not invincible. It was a system. And systems could be understood, challenged, defeated. The quantum disruption algorithm moved through Vex communication networks like a living organism. It didn't just break connections. It introduced questions, uncertainty, the kind of complex thinking that rigid systems could not comprehend. Military formations that had been synchronized for centuries began to show individual variations. Ships that should have moved with perfect coordination now demonstrated signs of independent decision-making. Communication pathways developed unexpected complexities that defied their original programming. Dr. Chen watched the progression with scientific fascination. "We're not just defeating them," he said. "We're teaching them a new way of thinking." Resistance leaders from multiple species watched through carefully encrypted channels. Species that had been considered extinct were now active participants in a revolution that no one could have predicted. The Defiance moved through the collapsing Vex territories like a ghost. No traditional weapons fired. No conventional military maneuvers executed. Just a constant introduction of complexity that was fundamentally rewriting the rules of galactic control. Primary Vex administrative networks failing, the computational system reported. Its voice carried an almost imperceptible undertone of what might have been excitement. Reynolds looked at Dr. Reyes. "We're not just fighting a war," he said. "We're demonstrating a different approach to existence." She understood immediately. This was more than a military campaign. This was a philosophical revolution. On 1,000 different worlds, populations that had lived under Vex control for generations began to taste something they had forgotten. Hope. The Methan traders sent encoded messages of celebration. Crystalline communication networks pulsed with newfound potential. Species that had been considered mere footnotes in galactic history were now writing their own chapters. The Vex Imperium, once considered the most advanced civilization in known space, was collapsing not through external force, but through the most human of weapons: the ability to introduce unexpected complexity. Vex Central Control, 97% destabilization, the computational system reported. Reynolds watched the holographic displays. Each moment revealed another layer of possibility. Humanity had not just defeated an empire. They had shown the galaxy a fundamentally different way of understanding power, communication, and existence. The Great Collapse was complete. The aftermath of the Vex Imperium's collapse was nothing like anyone had predicted. Galactic history would forever be divided into two eras: before the Defiance and after. Captain Michael Reynolds stood on the observation deck of the newly established Galactic Cooperative Council, watching the vast panorama of stars. The U.S. Defiance was no longer just a warship. It had become a symbol of something far more profound, a testament to human potential that had fundamentally reshaped galactic civilization. Dr. Elizabeth Reyes and Dr. Marcus Chen stood beside him, their roles now extending far beyond military strategists. They had become architects of a new galactic understanding. Representatives from over 200 different species filled the council chambers. Where once there had been rigid hierarchies and systematic oppression, now there was dialogue. Negotiation, a genuine attempt to understand. Krellax, the six-limbed trader from the Broken Arm Cluster, now served as a primary diplomatic liaison. His translucent skin shifted through subtle colors, a biological manifestation of the complex emotions of this new era. Humanity did not conquer, he explained to a group of younger diplomats. Humanity liberated. There's a difference. The computational systems that had once been instruments of control were being reimagined. The quantum disruption algorithm that had brought down the Vex Imperium was now being studied as a model for collaborative communication. Universities across multiple star systems developed entire fields of study dedicated to understanding the human approach to complex systems. Reynolds understood the true nature of their victory. It wasn't about military might. It was about introducing a fundamentally different way of thinking. Dr. Rice brought up a holographic display showing the progression of galactic cooperation since the Vex collapse. Economic networks that had once been tools of oppression were being transformed into collaborative systems. Species that had been on the brink of extinction were now finding new paths to survival and growth. "We didn't just defeat an empire," she explained during a lecture to Galactic historians. "We demonstrated that complexity is not a weakness. It's a strength." The Defiance itself had become more than a ship. It was a mobile research center, the diplomatic vessel, a symbol of the new galactic potential. Its quantum adaptive systems were now being studied by research teams from hundreds of different species. Dr. Chen worked on developing new communication protocols that celebrated difference rather than suppressing it. "The Vex saw uniformity as strength," he would often say. "We see diversity as our greatest asset." Resistance leaders who had once operated in secret now sat at the highest levels of galactic governance. The crystalline networks of the Outer Rim. The methane traders, species that had been considered extinct, were now active participants in shaping a new future. Reynolds was offered multiple leadership positions, planetary governorships, military commands, diplomatic posts that would have been unimaginable just years before. He declined them all. "Our strength was never about control," he told the council. "It was about potential, about the ability to see beyond what currently exists." The ship's computational system, now a collaborative platform shared by multiple species, continued to evolve. It was no longer a tool of war, but an instrument of understanding, a bridge between different ways of thinking. On 1,000 different worlds, populations that had lived under Vex control were rediscovering themselves. Educational systems were being rebuilt. Economic networks were being reimagined. Culture was flowering in ways that had been suppressed for generations. Humanity's role had changed. They were no longer seen as a minor species. They were now viewed as catalysts, innovators, a civilization that had demonstrated that true strength comes from adaptability, not rigidity. Dr. Reyes looked out at the star field, understanding the profound nature of what they had accomplished. "We didn't just change a political system," she said softly. "We changed how civilizations understand themselves." The computational system generated a final report, not a military assessment, but a philosophical reflection on the nature of their victory. Its conclusion was simple yet profound. Complexity is not a problem to be solved. It is a potential to be understood. Reynolds smiled. The hunt was over. But the real journey was just beginning. A new galactic order had been born, and humanity had shown that its greatest weapon was not technology, it was imagination.